Hi, and welcome to this edition of Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall, and joining us today in studio is Chris Hendricks. He is from the 11th Bristol District, basically representing the far north end.
Correct.
And all of Acushnet. So you've got a pretty big area to cover there.
Yeah, no, includes the entire town of Acushnet, as you said. So, and it's a diverse, demographically. So it's a fun district for sure.
Chris is the newest member of the legislative delegation here from New Bedford. So congratulations on your win.
Thank you.
And let's get started with that. I mean, a busy time for you. You're probably just learning your way around the State House, as the saying goes, when you first get elected. But how's it been going the first couple months here?
Yeah, no, that's quite literally how it is. I'm learning my way around the State House. It's been good. It's been a busy, couple months or so. We got sworn in on January 2nd, so it's been about a couple months. Just building relationships, co-sponsorships. I'm sure you're fully aware. A lot of those, and just meeting people and learning the procedures for certain things, and like I said, building relationships, which I think is going to be the most important piece to the puzzle as far as being a state representative.
Is that the hardest part when you look at starting? I guess just starting any new job or whatever, just trying to get your bearings, if you will, about the job, what you have to do, and meeting the people and stuff. You probably don't hit your groove until for
right.
a while, really.
Yeah, no, there's an absolute learning curve to this, especially with such a unique position. It's not like I'm going to an office and have to do X, Y, Z and then go home. So it's a lot of it's more of a robust learning experience than your average workplace. But it's essentially that. It's just like anything else that you have to learn and do your best at.
One of the things with your district, I think, and each representative, really except for Representative Cabral, has a unique district because there's other towns or other communities involved besides New Bedford. You have New Bedford, which obviously the north end, but in a sense you represent New Bedford, but you have Acushnet, which is, I want to say, rural America in some
right.
ways. So, I mean, your focus is pretty broad, really.
Right. Yeah, no, as far as policy related to the two types of areas demographically, you're exactly right. A lot of issues overlap, like the opioid crisis certainly is an issue that both towns and both municipalities can work to resolve. But yeah, so learning the different issues for each town, things on the municipal level versus things with the Board of Selectmen and the City Council. But you learn all that, and it's just a matter of getting out there and meeting everybody, and then once you've done that, you can kind of figure things out.
I chuckle like you're dealing with farmland, farmers, and fishermen.
Yeah,
when you really think about it, I mean, it
runs the gamut.
It's that diverse.
Which I'm fortunate that's the case. Gives, like I said, it's a more of a robust opportunity to make change and do things positive. You've
got quite of what's the word I'm looking for? You've got a lot of committee assignments that you have. So there's a lot of interest. You're on the House Committee for Redistricting. I don't know when that comes up.
Yeah, from what I hear, they don't meet too often.
But is redistricting happening anytime soon?
So that would be after the census.
Okay.
So I guess they start the procedurally they start things now.
Yeah.
So obviously we haven't met yet. So I'm a little I can't really tell you too much about.
No, but it's interesting that I didn't know when it was coming about.
It's certainly a very interesting committee. I'm very excited to be part of it because to be part of redistricting is a crucial part of our democracy, and it's going to be very cool.
Housing, the Joint Committee on Housing, the Joint Committee on Judiciary. You are an attorney, so that's got to be a passion of yours, and Veterans and Federal Affairs.
Correct.
So your portfolio is pretty broad when it comes to committee assignments as well.
Right. Yeah. In the judiciary assignment, that was my first choice. I wanted. I was hoping to get on substance abuse and mental health. Given my personal background, but we can still support all the bills that will help in that regard. But as far as the judiciary and housing, I couldn't be happier about those assignments.
You talked a lot about the opioid crisis during your campaign. That was one of your major focus of the campaign. As you start the job now, I don't want to say how tough is it, but what are your hopes of accomplishing, I guess, if you would say, in your first year in office? Or is it really just to get a conversation going, a real good conversation? Right,
it's that, getting a conversation and getting things done relative, specifically with the opioid crisis, aftercare. There's a lot of bills out there that I've co-sponsored that tweak how we prescribe medications and recovery coaches and training for medical professionals and things of that nature, and also for children who are born with an already dependency on opioids. But I think we can put a stronger focus on aftercare. I was speaking with the head of the Greater New Bedford Health Center in downtown, and she said, a lot of the problems we're having is just access to aftercare. And she said that the recovery coaches, which was put into law, I believe there was two major laws, 16 and 18, I forgot which one that was put in. But the recovery coaches is a great idea, because what that is, it's essentially, I go to AA regularly. I had a sponsor at certain points along the way, and I know how helpful they can be. So that's what recovery coaches are essentially doing, acting as sponsors for people who aren't necessarily involved in AA. There's many avenues to recovery. I was actually with the Mayor Walsh in Boston last night, and he said that he was at a meeting and he realized that someone said there are many avenues to recovery, not just AA. So I think a robust program for aftercare with people coming out of detox, coming out of prison. The statistics on people coming out of prison and dying of overdoses because of fentanyl. They go into prison not knowing what fentanyl is. They leave coming out, and all of a sudden fentanyl is all everywhere.
Right.
And so there's a real need for getting pilot programs involved with the jails as far as treating substance abuse.
Up to this point, when you look at the issue of opioid crisis and what have you, I mean, there's been a lot of talk. Has it been the kind of talk that reaches solutions, or in some ways it just seems like this 600-pound gorilla that you really can't take a bite out of, because there's just it's so big a problem.
Yeah, no, there's a degree of that. Like I said, there's a lot of little fixes that
I think
we
the
have.
intentions are good by people, but I think when you look at it, people don't know what to
In
attack.
my opinion, we need a bolder outlook as far as solving this problem. Safe injection sites, that's something I'm not necessarily for or against yet, but Mayor Walsh came out for it after being against it for so long, after seeing how well they're doing with it in Canada. So I think bold actions like that are it's a draconian disease, a draconian condition, so we're going to need draconian measures, things like possibly safe injection sites, or things of that nature that really take a big chunk out of this problem.
One of the things you and I were talking about off camera was a lot of these things take funding, and I know that the legislature itself is starting to tackle the governor's $42+ billion budget proposal, and I know that the House will come out with its own budget plan. But revenue. I mean, there's only so much money in the pie, and these things cost money. And as you and I were talking about, it's a tough thing to get.
Yeah, that's one of the challenging, frustrating things. Like I said off camera, there's a lot of optimism and there's a lot of energy to get things. The funding formulas for Chapter 70 straightened out. The funding formulas for the charter school reimbursement. Things like transportation. We're having this MBTA issue that they're raising hikes and not expanding service. So it's.
And I saw too that included even more, not just the MBTA, but just transportation hikes and other things.
Right.
Tolls and gas tax and all sorts of stuff.
Right. So there's a need for it, and I think the referendum on the millionaires tax was shot down, but there's a bill that has I don't recall how many co-sponsors, but quite a bit. I think a majority if it came to a vote today. So that's awesome, and it's taxing a small percentage of people, and I think it's gonna, if the projections are the same as the referendum was, which was $2 billion per year. I mean, what can we do with $2 billion a year? I could say we dump a majority of that into education and get that solved.
Is it hard to, as you're looking at it now, coming in with fresh ideas and just a different outlook than some people who've been in the institution, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, just a different perspective, and I'm just using the gas tax as an example, and you and I were talking about off air, if you raise it 10 cents a gallon, hypothetical, but that's what it is, especially in your district where income is not that great.
Right.
I mean, a 10-cent gallon tax is an impact on people, and that's got to be hard. I mean, you're trying to weigh in, as you said, the bigger picture items, but versus the mom and pop people in your district who are, yeah, a 10 cents a gallon increase, that's going to impact my constituents.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to tax policy, I mean, there's different ways you can do it, right? You can do it by taxing the people who have the money, who've benefited from our system of a democracy, of a capitalistic system, who've attained so much wealth. We can either tax those people with little effect on their overall quality of life and standard of living, or we could tax, like you said, things like gas tax, which is going to tax basically everybody in an already vulnerable. The job numbers are good, but it's still a vulnerable economy for sure with respect to wages. So I think you're exactly right about that. There's tax policy that makes sense, and there's tax policy that doesn't. So I think this millionaire's tax, I think, is huge, and we're going to be putting our foot to the pedal on this.
Is there things with corporate welfare too? Is that something the legislature is looking at? I know that's an issue with some people.
I don't know too much about any bills relative to that.
Yeah.
I know, obviously this millionaire tax would tax people who are in that demographic of people for sure.
Right.
But as far as corporate taxes, I think it accounts for 10% of our annual revenue.
I know people
right
just
now.
bring it up.
I would like to see that higher, if my numbers are correct. But yeah, I think that's an avenue to bring in more revenue in an efficient way without doing too much damage to the taxpayer.
We're talking to Chris Hendricks from the 11th Bristol District here on the Beacon Hill Report for this month. You touched on education funding. I know that's been a big issue. I know Rep. Cabral talked about it, especially here in the district. I know you've talked to the mayor and school committee members and what have you. Charter schools and taking money, they will say, from public school kids. The charter school folks say, well, we're public schools. So, but it does seem as though the formula is an issue.
Right. So the formula that you just referenced was formulas that were created in 1993. I think there's been amendments along the way to this to the education law, but you're exactly right. We need to fix the formulas. Not only to provide more resources and monies directly to the schools, but also in reimbursing those schools when their kids go to charter schools. Now that, you mentioned Tony Cabral, he has been on the forefront of this issue, and I think he's articulated a lot of the problems with the funding and the solutions with this issue, which is great. So we've been meeting regularly. We had a meeting in his office with the delegation yesterday to really hunker down and figure this out. A lot of the solutions he's presenting deal with direct funding of the charter schools based on statistics and data as opposed to speculative numbers. I think that's one of the huge problems of this education is that it's based a lot on speculation. Okay, you're going to have X amount of speculated kids going into charter schools, so let's pay them based on that. Tony's solution has to do with the per pupil amount and the difference that that is left over for the public schools. So directly paying those charter schools amounts like that would certainly alleviate a lot of the pressure on these cities and towns across the state.
The interesting thing with the charter schools, at least here in New Bedford, and especially for your district, is that you've got obviously New Bedford, which has 3 charter schools right now, so you're dealing with that issue and the funding formulas, and obviously the schools need more money to do the things that they need to accomplish in New Bedford public schools. But Acushnet, I mean, you probably don't hear any issue about charter schools from the Acushnet folks.
No, fortunately, that's not much of an issue.
But
is
schools. Education funding an issue in the smaller towns?
Absolutely. I'm going to tomorrow this a PTA fundraiser for the Acushnet PTA at Century House, and so.
So when you talk about, not just you, but when people talk about the education funding formula, it doesn't just impact municipalities such as New Bedford or Brockton or Fall River, but it's smaller towns too.
In a lot of these discrepancies with amounts and lack of funding have to do with health care and pensions. So that, whether you're an urban city or a small town, that's going to affect you. And a lot of the bills that, a couple of bills that I've co-sponsored, the Promise Bill, which tries to get a lot of that under control, and Tucker's bill, I don't know if it has a name to it, but that is basically reimburses cities and towns, again, based on hard numbers relative to how many people do you have in the healthcare system, how many people do you have on a pension, and it directly reimbursed based on hard numbers as opposed to speculation, which I think is what we need, the direction we need to be going in.
Is it to get legislation passed? Is it I don't want to say municipal legislators versus rural legislators, but is it such as like that, or do you feel as though there's enough momentum on Beacon Hill in general that something could get passed?
Right. So that's going to be an issue. You know, you have representatives from cities like me and Tony and the guys in Boston, Worcester, Holyoke, who are dealing with these charter school issues.
Right.
Then you have the representatives and senators from small towns who don't even have this issue.
Right.
So their big concern will be if we amend these education formulas, their districts will get less money theoretically than cities like Worcester or New Bedford or Springfield, which would be true. And what I would say to that is, you know, everybody in the state has an interest in an educated child, whether they live in that community or not. And so I think, you know, the disparities as far as the funding that each municipality needs is it's just the nature of society. And so I think some towns getting, or some places getting more money for school funding than others, I think is an appropriate way to go, so long as those other rural communities are still taken care of. And statistics has shown that you know, these rural communities, and most of them are doing a hell of a lot better than places like New Bedford and Worcester are doing.
Right. Speaking of
In Boston, frankly, too.
and people say Boston drives the bus.
Yeah.
You know, if the lawmakers through Boston can get enough momentum, they'll pick up the other urban lawmakers as well, and then the momentum will go. You know,
Right.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Boston's having just as many problems as we are as far as with charter schools.
Staying with the education theme, one of the things that comes up, and I know you've talked about this on the campaign or whatever, is higher education and the cost of higher education. And I know that the funding at the state schools, they'd like more funding. But at the same token, going to Bridgewater State or UMass Dartmouth isn't what it was 15, 20 years ago either.
Right. Yeah, so if you go to a state school, if you do well in high school and you get into a state school, you shouldn't be swamped with $30,000 to $50,000 of debt when you leave. It's a public university. That's the whole point of a public university. So I think alleviating those pressures it should be our top priority as far as higher education. Now, getting the money to do that is a different thing. You know, telling a school that you should lower your tuition, it's not that easy. You know, you have to provide some sort of avenue of recoupment, I would imagine. But you know, I was at the Legislator Academy several months ago in UMass Amherst, and the president was talking about, the $65 million building we have, that we were in at the time. He's talking about how high tech it is. And I'm thinking to myself, do we need to be investing money in buildings and technology for these schools? How about putting that money that wherever it came from into tuition reimbursements or being able to make it easier for people to attend the school, not dine in a $65 million building. So I think there's a prioritization issue in the higher education sector as well.
I don't know if it's true or not, but somebody was saying to me that UMass in general, not UMass Dartmouth or any one particular, but UMass in general, is seeing more applicants than ever before because the private schools are so outrageous financially that kids now are going in. This is their first choice, is to get into a state school. Yeah. And it's squeezing the other kids out too, that who would go to UMass or Bridgewater or wherever. Right. Because that's all they could afford.
The people who really need the benefits of a public
Correct.
school. Yeah. That's the whole. You articulated the whole problem with higher education, and it's sad. You talk to. I remember when I was bartending, I used to have a guy named Chimmy come in all the time, and he was from England. And he said, he has his PhD, and it's like, it cost me like $1,000 to get my PhD. We should be prioritizing access to education like that, especially in a time that's with the media and misinformation and propaganda flying all over the place. The last thing we need is an improperly educated population to combat all these issues.
And although you don't represent Dartmouth, I know obviously you work closely with UMass Dartmouth because a lot of your constituents are going to go there. Right. And like you said, I don't know what the tuition now is at UMass Dartmouth, but you add on the housing and fees and whatever, and you're probably up to around 20 grand.
It's a burden, right?
And for families here, that's a hard sell.
Completely. And And then you get loans, and then these students walk around with these loans. I'm still paying loans, and I'm 35. So it's a real burden that needs to be addressed. And speaking of UMass, I'm a graduate of UMass Law, and
which is doing great.
It's just doing awesome.
And I know my daughter is looking to go to UMass Law.
Oh, is that right?
And the success rate for the students who leave UMass Law, pass the bar, whatever, is growing.
I think we were second or third this past year in
saw.
bar passage, and that's quite frankly the only thing I should count as far as a barometer of how well the school's doing.
Right.
And I don't know what the status is now, but when I was there, they had a freeze on tuition. I think it was $23,000 a year. They said for the next 3 years, we're not going to raise tuition. It's going to be $23,000 for the subsequent 3 years. And I think doing things like that should be the priorities for not only small law schools, but schools across the Commonwealth. Whether it be UMass Amherst, prioritizing tuition, reduction.
And the success for people who graduate from, and we haven't mentioned BCC, the Bristol Community College, but when people get those degrees locally here from those two schools, which are so important to New Bedford, Acushnet, and the region, the success rate that they have after graduation is huge.
Right. Yeah. No, it's, and I'm actually meeting with BCC after our discussion here today. So I'm excited. I'm hoping we can get some more vocational training into the community colleges and in high schools, more common sense, relevant type curriculum as far as vocational training. So I'm excited to work on those issues.
We don't have a lot of time, got a few minutes left, but I know education and the opioid crisis, two of your huge issues that you were talking about in the campaign or whatever, but economic development, I just want to touch on that. Some of the things, I guess, that you want to focus on in this next year. What would you like to see economic development-wise?
Just in general terms, just to make it as easy as it is, make it as easy as possible for someone to go out and start their own business. I don't have any business experience, but I certainly worked for I bartended for years, so I know how small businesses run, particularly restaurants and things, restaurants like that. So I think it's an important thing to prioritize as far as making it easier. And this is actually a bill at the State House right now that would transform the tipping.
Right, about
how people get tipped.
Hourly rate.
Right. So how it is now is that if I'm a bartender and I work an 8-hour shift and no one comes to the bar, so I make $0. And I'm already getting paid $3 an hour, whatever the minimum wage is for tipped employees. It's the burden on my employer to make up the difference to get me to minimum wage. So he or she would have to pay me, an additional $10, $12 an hour in a check. Mm-hmm. But that I've been I know the restaurant business very well. I've been in it. I was very good at it. I've never seen any employer ever once even mention it. Never mind do that. So I think enforcing that would be better than making, like the bill I just talked about, doing away with tipped employees and putting them on a salary type hourly wage. So things like that, can always, and that would be pro-worker. That wouldn't necessarily be pro-employer.
Well, workforce development, workforce training, is there enough down here, or do we need more?
I don't think so. I think union membership and promoting unions and organized labor, and I think that's should be a huge focus on what we tell kids and what we tell young people in their late teens. I never knew how well of a living you could make by learning a trade in high school. I wish I did, because you're taught when you're younger that if you're in school, you have to go to college, and that's it. If you don't go to college, you're a failure, which couldn't be further from the truth. As I said earlier, I represent people in the trades and workers' comp cases in court. So, and I see how the standard of living these people can have when they have adequate skills in the trades. Yeah. So I think putting a focus on that is for the workforce, a young workforce. Relevant vocational training, the importance of unions, the importance of collective bargaining, and in a history of what unions have been through and how they've contributed to the society, I think should be another focus.
Has union changed? Have unions, and I'm not saying one particular, but have unions changed over the years too? I don't want to say their clout, but their influence or whatever.
Yeah, no, and that's by design. That's not by coincidence. You know, I think the strongest the labor movement ever was in the post-war era. And so the goal of corporate America since that time was to, you know, chip away at at union rights, collective bargaining rights over time, and over decades. This is where we are. I think it's like 6.7% of people of the workforce across the board belong to unions. I don't know what it was back in the time I spoke of, but
Right.
It's significantly higher than it is now. And I think when you have a workforce that's protected, you know, as far as collective bargaining, the right to organize, the right to have a say in the conditions and safety of your own employment, it will do dramatic changes to the economy. As far as raising wages, which is the kind of the last piece we really need to tie in this strong economy.
Well, that's the other thing too. You and I were touching on it off camera not that long ago, but the economy is doing well. There's no question about
Right.
it. But wages don't seem to be, and not just in Massachusetts, but in general, wages have not expanded the way the economy's expanded.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So I think that should be our focus.
More
again.
people are working, that's for sure,
Correct.
but the salaries, I guess
Right.
they're stagnant.
And you know, that just goes to show you the influence and power that corporate America has in legislation and lobbying. The fact that people always talk about our the GDP and all these economic numbers that are so high and great, but our wages are low. So what does it matter if I'm going to work and making $11 an hour, working breaking my back? So there's a lot to put attention on.
But the hard thing, you talked on the minimum wage or whatever too, and there's arguments both sides. How much can an employer afford, especially those independent, those small businesses that you were talking about, versus the corporations that have more resources. Let's put it that way.
No, I think raising the minimum wage, I'm for it, but you're exactly right. It does have, the data isn't completely conclusive on, you raise the minimum wage,
Right.
everything's great. A friend of mine opened up a business a few years ago, and if they had to pay someone $15 an hour back then, she'd have to work by herself. She wouldn't
Right.
be able to hire anybody. So I think the smaller business owners get hit with the rise in minimum wage. But I think that's it's good that they're doing it step by step, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we'll have to wait and see how that works out.
All right, we covered a lot in a half hour here, which I appreciate. We could have gone more,
Yeah.
and we'll check back with you again later this summer. You'll be back in to give us an update on how things are going. But thanks for joining us.
No, thank you.
Wish you the best of luck as the year goes on and finding a way around the State
Right,
House.
yeah,
But
I'm still finding. We don't have an office yet, but
Oh, no.
no, yeah. So they had to wait till committee assignments come and then the office. So within the next couple of weeks, I should have an office.
how can people get in touch with you? I should give you that.
My
option.
cell phone, 774-263-6100. My email at the State House is chris.hendricks@mahouse.gov.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us. That's going to do it for this edition of Beacon Hill Report. We'll talk to you again next month.